We're here today with Jason Jones.
Say hello, Jason.
Hi,
Say
Jason.
hello. So, thanks for joining. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Right now, in our political atmosphere, liberals are called communists. What do you think the drive behind that is? Anybody who's any right wing news or any right wing,
If there is a drive.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I mean, it goes back to, it plays into a couple things. One's nationalism, right? It plays into, if we can paint someone as a communist, then that person becomes foreign and alien and not of America. And so it's easier to dismiss those people with beliefs on the left if you just say, oh, well, he's just a communist. And it makes it easier for people to sort of lump them in with traitors or whatever. I mean, whatever you want to...
Some level of the enemy.
Some level of the enemy. And it and it goes all the way back to, the early 1900s, into the 50s with the anti-communism movement, the Red Scare, McCarthyism. They think that still carries water now. In some circles it probably does, but I don't think it carries the same water that it used to. I think people have become sort of woke to what capitalism is and what it isn't, and so the contradictions of capitalism being able to provide maybe what it used to in post-war USA, post-World War II USA, is no longer possible. And so, because that's no longer possible, people have begun to question capitalism in a way that it hasn't been questioned before. Maybe at least not for a long time anyway, not in my lifetime.
So, do we actually have representation when it comes to elections? Are we represented in this free market economy, representative democracy?
Right.
Are we actually represented, and what prevents that from happening?
So, one, we're not represented. That would be ridiculous if they gave us representation. That would spell the end of what they're trying to do. They can't enrich themselves if they're not allowed to relax EPA protections on the environment. They can't enrich themselves if they put into place stronger worker protections in the workplace. They can't enrich themselves if any of these things happen. So no, we don't have any representation. That's what I mean. Because we live under the dictatorship of the ruling class. When Marx talks about the dictatorship of the working class, it flips it.
Essentially, dictatorship of the proletariat is another way to say that would be the democracy of the majority of people who labor through either mental or physical.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So my understanding from listening to you guys is that it's the dictatorship of the proletariat as opposed to the dictatorship of the ruling class that we currently have.
Correct.
And thus an elimination of class, I would assume.
The end goal is elimination of class,
Yeah.
right? And class antagonism.
Right.
Is the left essentially growing, but our government moving? Or excuse me, is our culture moving left in terms of its politics? Are just regular citizens, as opposed to our government moving more right?
I think that more people are. I think the left has always been there, right? It's still not organized where it needs to be. But I think that the trends and the movement in the left is getting there. We've seen it sort of play out, and I'm going to, even with bourgeois democracy and bourgeois politics, we saw the election of the first African American president. We saw Bernie Sanders nearly win the nomination for Democratic nominee for president. And we've seen a growth in a lot of organizations associated with what would be considered at one point the far left, but now, in comparison to most other countries and places in the world, would essentially be center-left politics and priorities. So I think that the left is increasing in number in terms of folks who now understand what it is and can identify correctly with being on the left. And I don't think you might have had that in the way that you have it now, maybe before. But at the same time, when you have sort of that movement, then you have a reaction on the other side, of course, and a very swift and almost very violent reaction. We do have a much more right-wing government. Both parties are the parties of capital, right? They both. Nancy Pelosi said it herself. I'm sorry, we're capitalists. The Democratic Party is a capitalist party, plain and simple. They've admitted it, and they didn't even have to admit it. We knew that. They're not for any other. They're not for socialist revolution, right?
Yeah.
The Democrats are not going to do that. The Democrats,
even though 60% of their party membership is either DSA, Democratic Socialist, or Socialist.
Again, the Democratic Party moved away from their labor focus, and again with the decline in union membership, sought out their funds and money from corporate interests.
And I think that's been well documented.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
And so you still have in the Democratic Party, at least in the leadership of it, people like Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, who are beholden and have a vested interest in maintaining an economic system that benefits them directly or indirectly.
Right.
When you frame things in context of class, it's attacked, it's discredited, and you get accused of being a class warrior. So
Class warrior, I haven't heard that.
Yeah, the bourgeoisie love to call people fighting for healthcare and education as class warriors. So, because from their perspective, even though they have all that, they really don't have an interest in providing that for everyone. Because let's face it, like, do you want a sick worker? No, it's a loss of money. So you get rid of the sick worker, and they don't care if it's either through getting fired, layoff, or you die because you're no longer useful to them. It's that cold and calculated. People want to have this fuzzy, and I think this goes also to that bubble, is that they think, well, everybody's like me, right? We care about other people. Even the Trump supporters, like, I'm sure they thought in some way that Trump was a good person and cared about them. I don't doubt that was the case in some people who voted for him. But in reality, is that we have to take away that veil that the ruling class has put up, and take away the mask and expose them for what they are. They're cold-hearted and they are calculating people, and they don't view workers as human beings. Much like they try to get white folks to not view black folks and other folks, South Asian, East Asian, Mexican folks as human beings, because they're all rapists and murderers, right?
Yeah, and how would you say that plays out on the liberal left?
The liberal left is, they're not working against progressive things, but at the same time, they're only going to be traveling with us so far.
On the ground level, you mean, right? In
terms of grassroots stuff,
and
fighting back against this, what I would see as a move.
In
If
the
we're not
aggregate.
fascism, we're getting close to it, right? But also, the reason that they're liberal lefts and there is Marxist lefts and there's socialist left is that liberal left thinks in terms of reform, right?
Yeah.
They see as, we want to keep capitalism, but we want to make it more humane, right?
Yeah.
But as this has gone through reform after reform after reform. The civil rights movement, 70s, 80s, the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-globalization movement, all these gains, and when we do get gains, they immediately get taken away, right? So reforms get you nothing permanent. They are a temporary, I wouldn't even call it a solution, but I would say a temporary fix for the most naked parts of the exploitation that occur, right?
Get back to my earlier question, but yeah, like how the Democratic Party like played these games, basically.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the only lesson the Democratic Party's ever learned from losing elections is they have to move further to the right.
Yeah. Well. Yeah.
And that's a lesson that they learned time and time again. This time around, there's the leadership part of the party that sees that and is trying to move it in that direction, and you have a good size sort of like rank and file members of the Democratic Party who are trying to pull it the other way. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and I think we're going to get a little bit more idea of just where they stand after the midterm election. Right, we're going to have a definite better understanding of what that party is going to look like. At the end of the day, it doesn't change anything in terms of how we have to go about struggling. Right, it's not going to change anything in terms of what the ultimate goal should be, and that is not reform but revolution. And then, of course, when you get back to the red baiting thing, revolution. They want violence, or they want to overthrow the government. Revolution exists in various different forms all across the world. Salvador Allende in Chile had a peaceful revolution with the ballot box, and instituted socialist government.
Chavez.
Correct. Hugo Chavez in Venezuela.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be afraid to use that word, because that's essentially what we want, right?
Yeah.
Revolution is not something to shy away from. It is something that needs to be in front and center.
And the Beatles did have like 2 songs.
They did. One was anti-Mao, one was kind of pro-Mao.
Right. Interesting.
Right? I can't remember now. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well, the one was just a bunch of weird psychedelic noise, so I don't know. Maybe that was the pro now.
Much slower. It's much slower.
Bringing up other countries. Where does historically, just throughout history, where does the United States stand in a Marxist perspective on countries that are looking for socialism as an answer, electing governments? Like, we know that Stalin is today called a dictator, and Hugo Chavez is called a dictator. Maduro's the new dictator. That Fidel was a dictator. What is the what is the Marxist view on what's called a dictatorship in America, and what does the U.S. What's the history of the U.S.'s involvement in those countries?
Well, a dictator is pretty. When the U.S. government calls anyone a dictator, you can pretty much bet that it's someone who's trying to do something for their country, and they cannot stand it because they can't get their dirty little fingers into their natural resources or all that other shit. So then automatically that person becomes a dictator. Hugo Chavez immediately is a dictator because what's he doing? He's nationalizing oil fields. He's diverting petrodollars back to social services and improvements in healthcare and education, building houses for the poor. So immediately he's horrible. In fact, anyone who has a heart and runs a country is going to be the U.S.'s enemy. Fidel Castro, you had the agrarian reform that occurred after the revolution, you had literacy campaign, you had per capita the number of doctors producing Cuba is more than any other country in the world, and they send their doctors everywhere. They sent their troops to stop apartheid in Angola and sacrificed thousands of their own soldiers. And so anybody who acts in the interests of workers or acts in the interests of people is a dictator.
And you think make more recent examples of that, I'm sure, with Libya, so forth.
Sure. Gaddafi, although not a Marxist socialist, but he did institute some socialist programs.
So what's the difference between, for example, the U.S. says that Chavez was a dictator. How was Chavez put into power as opposed to, say, somebody like Donald Trump? I mean, how did that...
Well, that's a good point, because Chavez enjoyed the popular vote of the people in Venezuela, right? They don't have an electoral college. Donald Trump wasn't even elected.
Say that again. They don't have a what?
Electoral college.
What? That's insane.
Right.
So isn't there a United Nations, like some sort of United Nations Council or coalition that evaluated people's electoral systems?
Sure.
And put U.S. on like number 38 or 40
48 out of 50 or something.
Yeah, like I can't remember the number, but with Syria being very way higher of a grade than the U.S. And
right,
that's it. That's the context I read.
We have voter ID laws, and that's to keep people from voting. We have gerrymandered congressional and state congressional and Senate districts to water down African American and Latino votes, and we also have the Electoral College, which can basically ignore the total number of votes and instead delegate votes by the number of electoral votes each state gets. So,
yeah,
and then if you want to get, the possibilities are kind of limitless for them, because even though, say a certain candidate wins the most votes in one state, the Electoral College members can actually not honor that. They're not bound to even vote.
Right.
They do.
Hence, the popular vote doesn't always have to count. So, and is that the case in, so somebody like Maduro, that right now Venezuela is seeing huge uprisings of the people, we'll just say, the people which are business leaders and the upper middle class, the more wealthy. But Maduro seems to have become the president. So is that because he won this popular election?
Correct. He won more votes than everyone else.
How does the C.P.U.S.A. or Marx, or like, what is that idea of electing a president or electing representatives as opposed to what is going on in the United States now? What's the do the Marxists and the communists and do they just believe in let's throw a dictator up in there? Because that seems to be what the consensus of the right wing.
Red baiting.
Yeah.
No, it would be a democracy like anywhere else. It would be workers who would be voting, and there would be an electoral college that would be done away with, because that electoral college exists for one reason, and that's protect those in power, and to protect and ensure that a communist couldn't get elected, right? A safeguard that the ruling class has put in place if democracy doesn't work out the way they want it to.
And it was put in place during the Reconstruction era, I believe. I mean, it was a countermeasure against all the accomplishments of the abolition movement.
And so
okay,
but it's going to be. And the other thing too is so Venezuela, and I use their example because I thought this was really great. So one of the first things Chavez did was to ensure that everyone had a copy of the Constitution, right? The Venezuelan Constitution.
Wait, what?
Right. and
so
engage
Chavez
them in the political process. And and he engaged the workers in the political process, made sure they understood what their protections were in the Constitution, provided constitutions to all the people free. And so what you saw there was an increase in democracy, not a decrease in democracy.
I had seen or read somewhere that the Constitution, or at least certain amendments on the Constitution, were printed on bags of rice or
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah,
And
they
so
were-
that's insane that when I heard about that.
So yeah, so you have everybody who understands what your rights are. And in the U.S., I don't see it anywhere. I wasn't given a free copy of the Constitution, were you? I mean,
No. Where have the communists in this country in history actually helped or made some kind of change for the better in our country?
I'll go back to the union movement, the C.I.O., getting the end of child labor, 40-hour work week, equal pay for equal work. We're getting toward that anyway. Civil rights movement, the first party to call for equal rights during the time of Jim Crow. Instrumental in a lot of the civil rights work also in the 60s with, Bayard Rustin was a comrade. James Baldwin was a comrade. And just doing all the work around organizing various workplaces. Gary, Indiana, steel mills up there. And also advocating for, equal rights for LGBTQ folks. Fighting for, and alongside the farm workers during grape strikes in the 60s. We contributed a lot toward working class struggle. But oftentimes it goes without being noticed because comrades couldn't be, out and say, I'm a red. As if they were, that would risk a lot of detriment to the movement, and then also, repercussions for that person, jail, prison, whatever, or violence.
Right.
Given this stage of struggle and the situation we find ourselves in, because some may argue we are either in a proto-fascist state or we might actually be in fascism, we have to set aside for the moment the differences in terms of theory, the differences in sort of our varying political organizations and how we get to communism, because anarchists and communists both agree that our end goal is communism, right?
Anarchy and communism are the same.
And so,
in its end result.
in the end result, right. So, but right now, we are all definitely united in opposing fascism. And I think that is the focus of struggle right now, and it's the correct focus of struggle. Even if, just in terms of short-term preserving what little democracy we have under bourgeois democracy, just so that workers aren't experiencing naked aggression from the government, which is occurring, right? We have workers and comrades who are in border states who are terrified, and they literally risk their freedom going to work every day. African American comrades who risk their lives just existing or driving to the wrong part of town. We are living in a situation where those are the real conditions that we have to deal with, and I think that we have to, as a united front, fight back in whatever ways that we can, electorally, in the streets, and all those ways and all those forms are the correct way to do it. But that also goes back to the history that we all have, because we have communist comrades, dirty commies, and anarchists who all came out of IWW. We shared that, and that's a shared history, and that's important shared history. And that was a very dark time for workers as well. So I think that as past as prologue, we have to sort of look back a little bit and reflect on those things, and we also need to come together with a specific goal that we can work toward in a coalition.
Right now we're seeing I'm pretty sure it's the largest group of women elected to governorships and to Congress or the Senate. We're seeing more people who have a belief in, more representatives who have a belief in, a national health program, union support, supporting a higher wage. Like, what do you see that? How do you perceive like what's going on in the political climate with that?
Well, that's definitely positive, right? I mean, we definitely need more women in power. We need, especially more people of representing, African Americans and Latina, Native American. We need more people to actually represent the communities that they're from, right? So you saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is someone from her community that actually represents the people that live in her community versus the person who was there before. His name is escaping my mind for some reason, but I know he's a white male. These are all positives because that increases your representation in this system. Now,
Your actual representation.
not the BS choice that oftentimes we're faced with. For people who play lip service and pretend to represent you, but then do the exact opposite. I definitely get the sense from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that she's going to be someone who's actually going to go in there and say, I'm representing the people from my district, and she's actually going to do something. And I see we have the most number of women running for office than we've ever had, and in all levels, local, state, federal, and that's great, and I support that 100%. The question then becomes, once you are in power, right, you are inside this governmental system that still operates the way it always has. But the question then becomes, one, how do they act once they get in there to essentially do what they want to do without having to sacrifice a lot of, some of their goals and some of the platform that they ran on to actually get things done. And in order to do that, there has to be this massive organization, grassroots massive organization that supports them. So with the example of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, what she needs in order to be effective is like 100% of the people she represents just organized and organized well so that she is guaranteed not to lose that seat, because she's going to go up for re-election in 2 years, right? So that will then free her up to go in there and not make compromise, but try to break the fucking system, right? But that's where the rubber meets the road, right? So, one, does that exist? I doubt it. Two, when she does get in there, how will she function and operate and be successful, right? Once she gets into power, once she gets into Congress, because there's still that huge machine, that's still that huge capitalist machine that is hell bent on pushing forward the interests of the oligarchs.
So we know that Gus Hall in the 80s ran as a presidential, was it, candidate?
Gus Hall and Angela Davis.
Ran for presidential offices in the 80s. I think it was something around 1 million votes.
It sounds right, but I'm not sure.
Okay. I think it was somewhere around 1 million votes. Right now, what do you think the would happen, or what could you foresee happening besides red baiting when if a Communist Party member ran? What is the Communist Party plan, or if you can tell us that?
Now, but I'm talking about it. Is it within Indiana
I'm just talking about in general.
in general?
So like a national election for like president? Like,
Well, not for president, but just for maybe for smaller offices. I mean, I know
Seats in the
that
House
in the House, for mayor, for
and so forth.
city councils, things like town hall. What is it? Town
council. Or
Town
city
council.
Yeah.
What would you see, considering that there is a rise of the left, and maybe the Democratic Socialists aren't running in that town, or So what do you think?
It would have to be someone. I certainly think it's possible. I think it's definitely winnable, but it has to be someone who has been in that community, has struggled with the workers in that community, because folks that we represent, if we're getting into power, have to be people that know us. Whereas, people like Joe Donnelly, like you don't.
That's his name.
You don't have to know him, and he's not of us. He's the centrist corporate Democrat they put in there as a space filler for Indiana.
Yeah.
But we have to, when we run, we have to do it in a way that engages collectively a community, and one that knows who we are and knows that we are fighting for health care and wages, hell, even potholes and better sewers, because you can do that here in Indianapolis and win as a communist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is funny how the privatization of just pothole filling is obviously a failure here in this
Did you see
town.
which
Yeah.
is it Domino's that's like filling potholes?
Oh yeah, something
I
like
was looking at
that.
a commercial like we're
Yeah.
relying on Domino's to fill potholes.
They're using pizza dough, folks. Pizza dough.
Yeah, didn't they? Didn't they come out like all like pro-choice back in the '80s or something? Yeah.
I don't know.
Domino's. Yeah.
This segment's brought to you by Domino's.
Right. Okay, all right, Jason. Thank you for coming and talking with us. And it's always
And
a
next
pleasure.
time we'll talk about Palestine and stuff.
Palestine. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
brush
right.
up.
I'll try.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate the invite.
Thank you.